Here. Welcome everybody, good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Rasmussen from PTAG, and welcome to today's PTAG webinar on I2PD, Industrial Integrated Project Delivery. I2PD, a good candidate for quickly planning and executing capital projects as government and industry relaunch the global economy. And I'm joined today by Michael Dubreuil, Managing Director at PTAG. And Michael is also the past chair of the I2PD Research Committee at the CII, Construction Industry Institute. And with Michael is Bruce Burwell, our partner in charge of capital projects. And Bruce is the current chair of the I2PD Research Committee with the Construction Industry Institute. And with that, the last bit of housekeeping is just for those who just joined, please direct your questions to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll queue those questions up, and I'll be asking them on your behalf throughout the presentation. And with that, over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Jeremy. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we are with COVID and how we are going to begin the recovery process, and how large-scale infrastructure and industrial projects will be part of that. We'll talk about what's needed to deliver these projects quickly to take advantage of the stimulus funding that's coming. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. He's going to talk about what I2PD is, and then we'll do a wrap-up with Q&A at the end. So with that, next slide, Bruce. So since the middle of March to where we stand today, the economic impact of COVID, on top of the tragic human impact, is that on a global scale, GDP is projected to contract by 3.8%. That's an increase over the original forecast that we looked at the beginning of April of 2.4% contraction. Monetary loss is $347 billion, and that's based on the scenario where we have 6 months travel ban. Originally, the world thought it would be a 2-month travel ban. Here we are in month number 5. The U.S. did lift their global international travel ban, but they've kept all of the individual international travel bans in place, but they've done that in preparation, getting ready to begin to allow for international travel. And then the scenario also tied in an extremely sharp drop in demand from industry and consumers. Specifically for the US, looks like the US will have a 5% GDP loss in 2020, which is better than the original forecast for 5.2%. The reality, as it brings it home, is, as we can see, it's really hit millions of people with respect to unemployment. The good news is the unemployment rate's coming down. The bad news is it's not coming down fast enough. And as a matter of fact, from that top quadrant, we've had just last week, we just found out that another 1.8 million US workers went back to work, which is good news. The economic impact is not just a financial one for all of us, but the high levels of unemployment, the concern and the fears that people have has led to, not only in the US, but around the world, high levels of social unrest, as we've seen with protests and riots in many jurisdictions. Next slide. Infrastructure and large industrial projects have historically played a relief effort in bringing economies back through government funding. Strength is that it allows for quick economic growth because it creates lots of jobs, from the construction industry to the suppliers, all the way right back through to the resource industries and mining. But in addition to that, it's not just money that's spent and gone. We end up with long-term benefits that I'll talk about One of the challenges for a number of Western nations is we haven't spent a lot of money on infrastructure, even though there's been a lot of talk about it. And the challenge we face is these projects take a long time to get up and off the ground. However, because of new opportunities with respect to new technology, new means and methods, one of which we're going to talk about today, there's a chance to actually change how long it takes to develop, plan, and execute infrastructure and industrial projects. We have new technologies from robots that lay bricks, as an example, to massive 3D printers that can print foundations in structural steel, as well as robotics that can aid in large painting projects, as an example. All of that applies today. And then most important is the fuel that funds all of this, and that's the federal government monetary policies. So right now, investing, we believe, in infrastructure is the best approach to help stimulate the economies beyond supporting those people that are forced to stay at home. Things like 5G cellular is going to have a long-term impact, upgrading our electrical grid to be able to carry the capacity for electrical cars, new roads, and so on and so forth. Next slide. Past economic recovery examples show that this type of investment works. Projects such as the Hoover Dam, George Washington Bridge, San Francisco Mint are still here. Hoover Dam is still producing electricity 75 years after it was built. So talk about long-term economic impact. Tennessee Valley Authority, another utility that formed in the Tennessee area, brought much needed jobs back in the 1930s to the area, but also provided the base for electrification and industrial growth that the Tennessee Valley area has benefited from again, for the last 75 years. LaGuardia Airport is another good example coming out of the Works Progress Administration. And as a matter of fact, LaGuardia just is going through another revamp, and I was fortunate enough to fly through there back in January before the world shut down, and saw the results of that new investment. Next slide. Other past examples, a $13 billion stimulus package to help stimulate economies during the Great Recession in Korea, $13 billion stimulus bill in Canada, and the US back into the financial crisis invested $105 billion in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act for improving infrastructure. Next slide. Today, 2020, jurisdictions all over the world are planning to spend money to develop infrastructure and their industrial heartlands. The US under the current administration is looking at a $3 trillion stimulus bill to curb the effects of coronas, and that includes money for roads, bridges, power stations, and so on. The economic stimulus plus employment stability plus infrastructure investment, all of these three things together provide for a restart of our economies to get us back to where we were pre-COVID-19. Next slide. Up here in Canada, we have both federal government infrastructure spending, and like many places around the world, we have it also at the state level, or what we call provinces here in Canada. So the province of Alberta, hard hit by the coronavirus and the price collapse of oil, is just announced literally 4 weeks ago, a $10 billion infrastructure investment fund looking specifically to invest in schools, highways, bridges, rails. Highway 40, for those that know the province well, is the major artery between Calgary and Edmonton, and they're one of the projects under this program is to twin that, and it's a much needed investment that will allow for amazing follow-on investment from industry. And as Jason Kennedy said, we can't afford to lose a day when he announced that back at the end of June. And indeed, projects are organizing to get ready. Next slide. In New Zealand, all the way around the world, another example of an economy and a government looking to fund large shovel-ready infrastructure projects to boost the economy after their COVID-19 lockdown. They're looking right now for projects that are ready to go or that can be quickly made ready to go to help get their economy back on track. And this is in addition to $12 billion in funding that they already announced in late 2019 to work on improvements in infrastructure. Next slide. So what does it take to take these large infrastructure industrial projects and get them ready? Well, the first step is knowing that there is a project. So identifying the project, ensuring that the funding is going to be in place. And, you know, with the government funding that's now becoming available globally to stimulate their economies, we've got the first two components looked after. Critical, particularly as we've seen in the past, the 2008 recovery stimulus spending, streamlining permitting processes and regulatory support. Too many projects, too much money was left on the table back in 2008, 2009, because we couldn't get projects through the regulatory processes. We need projects where the design is available or where the design can be fast-tracked. We need internal large organization governance, fast tracking along with regulatory changes. We need commercial contract bases that will support the risks of fast tracking large scale complex industrial and infrastructure projects. You know, one of the things that the U.S. administration is looking to pass in this next round of stimulus funding is COVID liability relief for the next 4 years, so that businesses won't be afraid to make the necessary investment along with the public sector to launch these projects. The ability to identify and bring key stakeholders together, whether it's physically or virtually, as we're meeting today, to provide for optimum decision-making as we begin to develop, plan, and execute these projects. You know, we need project professionals that have the right mindset, the willingness to do it differently than the way we've done it for the last 50, actually the last 70 years. You know, we need highly collaborative professionals, or professionals that are willing to be highly collaborative to improve the fast tracking requirements to ensure that the funds are made available and the projects are able to deploy those funds through the planning and execution. And then finally, a critical resource is to engage labor leaders to ensure that we have the craft personnel necessary to execute on these projects. And that includes training and onboarding of younger people, particularly the millennials, and bring them into the workforce. There's a lot of effort that has been going on to convince the millennials that a career in the trades is a great way to financially, to financial independence and stability, to allow you to raise a family. When you put all these ingredients together, we think, and Bruce is going to talk about in a minute, we think all of these ingredients can be wrapped up into a commercial and delivery method called I2PD. With that, I will turn it over to Bruce. He'll give you more details.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll walk through what I2PD is, Industrial Integrated Project Delivery, and I'll talk a little bit about a pilot project that was implemented at OPG. So I2PD is defined as the balancing of 9 principles to promote team collaboration and integration of work processes and systems. 5 of the collaboration principles coming from the commercial IPD space. Commercial IPD has been around for 20 years, mainly in the healthcare and facilities sector, and very successful executing projects under an IPD model. 5 of those principles include continuous communication and issue resolution process, jointly developed and validated targets. These targets are validated during what we call a validation exercise, where the team is putting together a integrated risk plan, an integrated schedule, a jointly developed estimate of costs for the project, and I'll talk about some of those a little later on. Early involvement of key stakeholders. That would include, our general contractors sitting at the table during the design phase with our equipment suppliers, our OEMs, identifying constructability issues long before they mobilized a site. And those constructability issues are designed out of the project, long before the trades staff are on site. Collaborative and equitable decision-making. 4 of the integration principles come from the alliancing world. It started in England back in the 1990s, then migrated to New Zealand and Australia, and is used extensively in Australia and New Zealand right now. Financial transparency among the key participants. It's an open book concept. And when you have an open book concept and you're challenging each other on estimates to drive down cost, these are challenging conversations, but the intent is to push each other out of our comfort zones and away from our traditional mindsets and into a collaborative and trusting approach. Sharing of risks and rewards. The I2PD team, you sink or swim together. It's not me versus him. It's all of us in this together. And sharing of the risks, you still have a risk owner, but the risk mitigation plans and the cost associated with that risk is much lower with an integrated risk plan versus an individual risk plan. Relational contracting. All of the stakeholders will enter into a multi-party agreement. And the risk distribution. During the validation phase, we asked the key stakeholders and proponents to identify individual risk plans. We came together, dissected those risk plans, and came up with one integrated risk plan. And at that time, there was swapping and taking ownership of risk. So instead of pushing risk, you were sharing of the risk. So these 9 principles is what I2PD is built upon. This is the foundation of I2PD. Traditional contracting methods such as design, bid, build. It was one of the contracting methods in my previous career that we used extensively and always got the same results. They're bilateral type contracts where you're pushing the risk away from yourself and nobody's assuming risk. You're transferring that risk. It's a win-lose approach. And it's always what's best for me or what's best for my organization. Moving into EPC and design build types of contracting, you may conduct early involvement of key players using co-locations, maybe doing some front-end planning and some team building exercises. You may be doing some 3D modeling and partnering sessions, but it still separates the owner from the designer and our contractors. Shifting from transactional contracts to a relational type contracting with I2PD builds upon trust, collaboration, integration, and open communication. It utilizes multi-party agreements where all the parties are going to sign on to. Again, it's a shared risk-reward type contract where there's equitable decision-making. It uses a lot of the lean principles and methods and tools we'll talk about a little bit later, and applies liability waivers. When things go off the rails, we're not going to sue each other. And we always keep the project center focused and what's best for project versus what's best for me. And that culture is front and center of the project. Utilizing these methods, principles, I2PD is proven to provide enhanced safety, early cost and schedule certainty, and better optimized design. What types of projects can I2PD be delivered in? Well, we feel it can be delivered in all sectors. Power, utilities, and infrastructure. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the Auto Hold and pilot project. It can be used for transmission, generation, pipelines, dams, bridges, roads, infrastructure type projects, such as port and harbor upgrades. Downstream and chemicals sector for your refining facilities, your petrochemical facilities. Upstream, midstream, and mining for offshore and your oil and gas production. Manufacturing, life sciences for pharmaceutical and your personal protective equipment, PPE. We've heard an extensive amount of conversation since March regarding PPE. These manufacturing facilities can certainly utilize I2PD as the project delivery method. Facility and healthcare. These buildings, such as your warehouses, hospitals, museums, can all benefit from I2PD. And we see I2PD as fast tracking for projects that will provide not just the owner, but our contracting community with cost and schedule certainty. Can be applied to brownfield and greenfield type projects. Can be applied to a project specific contract or a program, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So why I2PD? Commercial IPD has been proven to have superior performance in metrics related to quality communication and change performance. A couple of surveys have indicated projects see less change, faster processing times, and significant faster delivery times. A major finding in one of these studies utilizing commercial IPD showed a striking uniformity of success for all projects, regardless of the project type, scope, geographic location, or previous experience with IPD. You do not need your A team as part of the I2PD team. We all have A, B's, and C teams, but working collaboratively in an integrated fashion, the I2PD team is there to support one another. It increases cost certainty with this delivery method. Assurance for our contractors that their costs are going to be covered. It provides a mechanism for schedule acceleration, and it provides our supply chain with certainty. You know, we implemented the pilot project without impacting or revising any of our supply chain governance with the OPG pilot project. It's proven to improve quality, collaborative and next generation environment that facilitates transfer of knowledge. In these multi-year projects, there is going to be a turnover of resources. Working as a team, integrating a new resource into the project will be virtually seamless. We feel I2PD is a great fit for the planning and execution for complex and large capital projects. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about alliancing. We talked about commercial IPD, now we're going to talk about alliancing. In Christchurch, New Zealand, back in 2010 and 2011, they suffered back-to-back earthquakes that impacted their infrastructure immensely. So they created a $2.2 billion rebuild program spread over 5 years. In the alliance, it included private and public entities. Public being Christchurch City Council, the government of New Zealand, and private contractors, as you can see there in the middle of the screen. Following that rebuild and the execution over that 5-year period, a survey was conducted. 80% satisfaction, project satisfaction, for those that were in the alliance and executed work in the alliance versus 25% satisfaction for the work that was executed outside of the alliance. The benefits of alliancing, it overcomes project uncertainties and difficulties with the team working together as one entity versus individuals or individual siloed organizations. So now I'm going to talk about our I2PD case study. I2PD was introduced to OPG back in 2018. It was described to the senior executives as everyone benefits from a project delivery method that is highly integrated and collaborative, as each of the stakeholders' goals align with one another. Again, and I've said it repetitively, what's best for project versus what's best for me. This particular project is an 8-year program overhauling 8 generators at 1 per year, mechanical, electrical, and civil overhaul. Within the project, some of the principles and methods we used was big room activities. We used the big room to kick off the project, and then we went through a validation exercise. It was an 8-week exercise where the I2PD team validated scope, developed the integrated risk model, developed the integrated execution plan, developed the integrated schedule, and at the end of that exercise, a validation report was written, signed by all the stakeholders in the I2PD team, and presented to the senior executives at OPG. The shared risk reward model. This model was developed by the I2PD team. The risk pool is calculated as a function of the expenditure or savings of the estimated payable costs, contingencies, allowances, and profits. Each risk pool member has a vested interest in the management of the project to reduce the payable costs, preserve the contingency, and identify opportunities, all with the mindset of executing the project without suffering safety-wise, quality-wise, but with the intent of driving down costs and saving schedule. 20% of them savings will be given right back to the owner. 80% will be distributed amongst the non-owner stakeholders in the I2PD agreement. This particular model was not dictated by the owner, but was developed by the I2PD team. This model is a template that can be applied to other projects, but we're not saying that you shall use this particular risk reward model. The multi-party agreement. The multi-party agreement was drafted for this particular project. It was drafted with members of supply chain, legal, and commercial representatives within the project from all of the stakeholders, including the owner. It was also vetted by the legal team from our CII research team. This template now is available for CII member companies to utilize. The joint risk assessment tool. I mentioned earlier that risk is shared. There's still an owner of the risk, but the cost associated with that risk is reduced substantially with the I2PD team supporting that risk if that risk arises. It's your risk, you own it, it's our risk, we support it. The management of uncertainty through the development of the risk register is a process that the owner, designer, contractor, consultants, subtrades manages both opportunities and threats. We talk about risk all the time, but there's also a focus on identifying opportunities. Again, what's best for project. So if it makes sense, an opportunity is identified, there could be some financial calculations completed, and if that opportunity is financially attractive to the owner, then there could be extra scope added to the project or additional scope added to the project. The risk register is managed through all phases of the project lifecycle. It's a living document that is updated all the way through the project, right through to closeout. The inclusion of all the parties allows the team to draw on diverse experience. Again, everybody is participating in mitigating these risks and identifying the risks, resulting in innovative solutions to capture and realize savings in cost and schedule. The benefits, 32% cost reduction versus traditional pricing that was first identified and submitted for this particular project. By working as an integrated team, the owner now has realized a 32% reduction in cost. Schedule improvement of 36%. From the RFP schedule that was identified by the proponents in the multi-party agreement, that schedule was reduced by 36%. outage schedule I'm referring to now. With all the 4 major vendors putting 100% of their profits at risk for equitable decision-making and the sharing of the majority of the execution savings that I identified with the risk model, in the risk model. So what are the benefits of I2PD? Increased certainty. When I first started to socialize the idea of running a pilot project back in my OPG days, I asked our COO, I said, what would make you happy if we moved from a traditional design bid build or a traditional design build agreement, and we ran a I2PD as the project delivery method? What would make you happy? And he indicated, tell me how much and tell me how long. That's what we're looking for. With this type of project delivery model, it will increase certainty. You can begin your projects that you would otherwise would not because of high levels of uncertainty. It protects our contractors financially, reducing the possibility of layoffs. When we decided that we were going to run a pilot project, we weren't sure if our contractors at the time would be interested in this type of model. When we contacted them through an expression of interest, there were 17 that we invited, all 17 put up their hand. Our contracting friends were longing for change just as much as we were as an owner. It incentivized all parties to have much to gain by meeting the client's financial goals. And it fosters that environment, a team environment. The project team is encouraged to work through changes rather than detail out each other's parties' liabilities. I2PD, we believe, you can realize through I2PD certainty of project success. And now I'll turn it back over to Mike, and he's going to summarize before we enter into questions and answers.
Thanks, Bruce. We know governments around the world are going to and have already begun stimulating their economies and are putting vast sums of money together to be able to plan and execute on infrastructure and large industrial projects. The world is facing 11.9% trade reduction as compared to last year. And the UN says urgent and bold policy measures are needed not only to contain the pandemic, but also to ensure that we stabilize economic growth and ensure that people get back to work. Next slide. Many of these governments are looking to quickly plan and execute infrastructure projects. As we learned from the 2008-2009 financial meltdown, setting the money aside is only one step in the process. Actually getting projects ready in a timely manner to go into construction is the bigger part of the problem. Next slide, please. So what we've attempted to describe in a very short period of time is that integrated project delivery for industrial projects, we call I2PD, increases speed, trust, and transparency as a contracting strategy and delivers project outcome certainty. It allows for faster designs, integrated and accelerated execution, and delivers to the owners and funders of these projects improved cost certainty, improved schedule certainty, with higher levels of quality and greater safety on these projects. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to you, Jeremy, and we'll go to questions and answers.